Most of us have heard this word covenant in one place or another. It has a slightly mysterious, sort of old world sound to it. Covenant. Today it means a lot of different things to different people. I want to talk some about the history of covenant in Unitarian Universalism so we get a sense of what it means to us in particular. The main root of that word for our UU tradition goes back to the Cambridge Platform. Though it was written all the way back in 1864, that document still defines how we organize ourselves as congregations today. In colonial America in the 1600s, little religious groups were popping up all over the place. Some, like the Anglicans and Protestants, were part of a bigger order. They had some structure to them. But there were also an array of Puritan and Congregational churches. Yes, those Puritans and Congregationalists were our predecessors. Each one was an independent community with its own slightly different beliefs and its own slightly different way of organizing itself. And the government of Massachusetts didn't quite know how to relate to all these different types of faith communities. So they asked these churches to have some sense of order. So in 1648, the leaders of those congregations came together and wrote the Cambridge Platform. And that document states that every congregation has the right to choose their own minister and control their own property or finances. Every congregation could select its own leaders within the congregation and choose how it would admit members and how it might expel them. The Cambridge Platform created congregational polity. It basically means that individual congregations are independent of any higher church authority and independent of each other. They had the freedom and the burden to organize those communities. So faced with that challenge, these new American religious communities used covenants. They were simple documents for the members to agree on how they would treat each other, what they expected. And the covenants were signed by every member of those little congregations. Much like our U.S. Constitution, covenants walk this very fine line of defending individual rights while preserving the integrity of a whole community. In our congregations, covenant is about striking that same balance that encourages individual exploration and expression, but also enhances our mutual community. According to the Cambridge Platform, church members offer themselves as a voluntary group of mutual church covenant. And that word mutual occurs over and over again in the document. It talks about mutual edification, mutual duty, mutual covenant. It says that members have power over one another mutually. Sounds a lot like marriage. Mutuality can look like a lot of different things, of course. In an elevator, we can mutually agree to look ahead at the numbers as we pass floor to floor rather than staring awkwardly at each other. Soldiers can mutually agree to risk their lives for one another and never leave an injured person behind. At Thanksgiving dinner with family, we can mutually agree to not talk about religion or politics because we don't want to see those fireworks. Mutuality can look like a lot of different things. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. My sense is that at Tapestry, we want to be a really supportive community. And we flirt with the possibility of what that might mean. But we aren't quite sure how deep the invitation to mutuality goes. We're agreeing to be polite to one another, or are we agreeing to bring our full, messy, complicated lives to let our hair down and be real with one another in this community? At Tapestry, most of us come from a culture that rewards being in control and having a plan and having your stuff together. It's a culture that teaches us that even in those moments when you don't have things under control, you put on a happy face and act like you do. As country music star Miranda Lambert sings sarcastically, "Go and fix your makeup, girl, it's just a breakup. Run and hide your crazy and start acting like a lady." Mutuality that goes beyond politeness is really risky business. But it's impossible to move beyond polite mutuality without letting some of our broken edges show. And practicing loving one another means giving others the opportunity to support and love us too. Not just the lovable us in our Sunday best, but the whole us with rough edges and real problems. In this community, people deal with financial uncertainty. Tapestry members live one day at a time with addictions to drugs and sex and alcohol and food. We deal with chronic illness, divorces and custody struggles. Some in our community are navigating the scary experience of memory loss. Some deal with homelessness. Folks are battling clinical depression and anxiety, and that nasty feeling of loneliness gnaws at a bunch of us. Those are some of the challenges that I'm privy to, but we don't seem to talk much about. And I'm not suggesting that today we should go out to coffee hour and pour our hearts out to each other. I just invite us to think about the depth of mutuality we're seeking in this community, or any community. If we want something deeper than polite mutuality, we have to take the risk of letting some of our rough edges show. As a small religious tradition with a lot of people who join in adulthood, we don't know a whole lot about our history as Unitarian Universalists. Looking at our history has two big advantages. One is that it gives us some rootedness. Unitarian Universalism isn't some new trend that we just picked up on. It's a religious tradition as old as the foundations of this country. And history gives us a sense of foundation. The other big reason to look at our history is that it reminds us that it was created by people just like us. Our religious life wasn't destined or handed to us by God. It was a matter of people choosing how they would be together, over and over, generation after generation. And now, in 2019, together in this community, we get to intentionally choose how we will be together. What will mutuality look like for us? I said earlier that there are a lot of different ways that people use that word covenant today. This is a little bit of how we get confused by it. We start to think of it as a contract. You do this for me and I'll do that for you. Or in housing situations, we all agree to do X, Y, and Z, or we'll start fining one another. That kind of tit-for-tat outlining of rules isn't the goal of covenant in our faith community. For us, you might think of covenant as convening or coming together. It isn't a contract for particular promises. It's a foundation for our relationship to expand. And the relationship in the long run is way more important than the individual actions that we spell out. Every Sunday, we read together that unison affirmation. You probably don't even have to read it now. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. I've said it since I was like 2. This particular reading, or something very similar, is used in most UU congregations across the country. And it's not a testament to how perfect we UUs are. It's a statement of how we hope to be in the world, fully recognizing that we will fall short and have to try again and again and again. We're not pretending to be saints. We're reminding ourselves that when we try, we're capable of being pretty amazing to each other. Our faith community is a place where we are reminded of how we can be. We UUs usually talk about covenant dating back to our congregational roots and the Cambridge platform. But if we're honest, we didn't come up with the idea or the word covenant out of nowhere. It's much older, rooted in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian tradition. Covenant is a religious concept. For the Jewish people, it was an understanding of them coming together through a promise with God. Here in America, members of those Puritan and congregational churches committed themselves to each other with God as a foundation of that commitment. Covenant has always been understood as invoking God. And it can be precarious to talk that much of our UU history because our theology seems so removed from that tradition. Some of us are comfortable with invoking God and our promises to one another, but just as many of us have no interest in using the G word, much less grounding our commitments in it. Our beliefs are too diverse today to be summed up with that single word. Most of our history is a continual expansion of our theologies. In the midst of all that difference, it's a covenant that draws us together. But what I'm wondering about is, how do we acknowledge and make up for that God component that was so important in the historical idea of covenant? This is our faith community, after all. This is where we celebrate and connect with what is sacred to us. If that's God, great. If it's love or truth or compassion or a power greater than yourself, if it's the goddess or the teachings of the Buddha or the great unnameable mystery that inspires awe and wonder, whatever that thing is, that power, that mystery that you identify as sacred, I invite all of us to invoke that sacredness as we navigate our relationships in this community. There are 1,000 different clubs that you could join, places where people are supposed to be nice to each other. In this community, we bring our support and our love and our brokenness and our need for one another with the understanding that our mutuality is reflected in and supported by the sacred. There's no expectation of any single particular belief. But we come here for a couple of hours a week with the opportunity to experiment manifesting our values and doing our best to embody the sacred. If you read the newsletter, you'll know that next week is our Water Communion Sunday. So it's an opportunity to bring a little bit of water from home or from your family adventures, and it will all make sense next week. Next week, we're also officially welcoming several new members to Tapestry in a new member welcome ritual. We do these Of course, for those handful of people who are newly joining and we get to introduce them to everyone. But rituals are never just for the people directly involved in them. Rituals are always an opportunity for everyone present to reflect on their own lives. So as we prepare to welcome some new members to this community next week, I want to ask you all to think seriously about what it is that you seek to get from this community. Do you come here for relationship and friendship and community? Do you come here for spiritual deepening? Do you come here for a connection with justice and to put language to those commitments? What is it that you come here for? And how do you need to show up in order to best get those needs filled? If you're anything like me, you're driven largely by habit. Maybe I'm a really boring person, but I tend to eat at the same restaurants and drive the same routes to wherever I'm going. I have the same daily routine. And honestly, sometimes when I show up here at Tapestry, it's because it seems that my car has driven itself here. But it's hard to find what you're looking for if you forgot that you're looking in the first place. So between now and when we gather next week, I invite you to remember why you first came in those doors and why you're here now. What are you looking for here? And just as important, how do you need to show up here to open your heart and your mind to receive what you seek? Amen.